Hey everyone, today we're going to talk a little bit about if you are in UK, you should probably be considering leaving UK in the not too distant future before it is too late. So that's a fairly dramatic statement. Obviously, if you have been paying attention, there's already been a ton of people leaving UK, like thousands and thousands and thousands of people over the last little while. And so we're going to talk today about why they're leaving, what is perhaps pretty likely to happen, and as a result, how you should be concerned or prepared, etc. And if you're going to stay in UK, which, perfectly reasonable, you might want to do that for some reason. What it is that you might do to try and protect yourself from those things. So let's dive in and talk about it right now. Before you do, if you have not come here before, I'm Michael from Offshore Citizen. We help people with international corporate structuring, with international tax planning, relocating to other countries, with doing international banking, etc. We help you with kind of assessing your situation, figuring out what is the best solution for you, designing a solution, and implementing it for you. Full everything end to end, customized, tailored so that it's not one size fits all. We don't care about which country, etc. We'll tailor it around you, your goals, your desires. And so if that's interesting to you, please reach out to us. You can either send a message through offshorecitizen.net or you can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below. Okay, let's dive in. So UK famously, back in the day, had a very, let's say, forward thinking stance towards being tax competitive. So they specifically had said for a while during the time when they were in the EU that they wanted to be the most competitive tax regime within the EU. And they had improved things markedly across a bunch of different vectors. Some of the more interesting ones were, so they had a 19% corporate tax rate, which back then you had like 39% in the US. So that was much, much better. It was below the EU average. You have pretty good ease of doing business in the UK, although their banking is, maybe a little bit more difficult to get set up than one would like in some places. But anyway, that's, neither here nor there. Pretty good payment processing, not totally insane bureaucratic filings like you get in some in the EU countries. So that was great. You had something called the non-dom regime, which we're going to talk about in a minute. The non-dom regime allowed people to move to UK and not be domiciled there, and as a result, they could have foreign income that stayed outside of UK, not taxable. That was pretty interesting and attracted a lot of different people. And then you had various different other things, such as there's no exit tax. There are some exemptions. They're actually quite sensible for small businesses in terms of, for example, the transfer pricing rule threshold, some exemption levels on CFC rules, etc. So these are technical tax terms. I don't expect you to know them, but the point is, as somebody who's a tax expert and deals with all this different stuff around the world, this was like fairly important for people who were going and setting up in the UK. There's also like a fairly coherent set of laws, which are pretty well designed, to be honest with you. So a lot of countries have terrible systems. For example, the US is just overly complex. It's really quite awful because there's exceptions on exceptions on exceptions, and it's not really coherent in terms of the way you think about it, etc. You could look at places like Canada or Australia or Malaysia, where a lot of things are very nebulous and it's hard to figure out. For example, the residency rules. And UK had done a great job of designing a system that had essentially objective things, which you really want in law. You really want people to not have to go to a court to figure out, interpret what's going on. But at the same time, it blended a lot of granularity. So they have, for example, something called the statutory residency test, and they use kind of this flowchart system that is really great. It's really well designed, okay? Then they leave the EU. There's Brexit. Not really great for UK so far anyway. And they started down this path, which included some raising taxes. So corporate tax rate beyond very small businesses went from 19% to 25%. Some other taxes going up. And they got rid of this non-dom. Now, that specific thing has led to a lot of people leaving UK, because a lot of people have been living in the UK for quite some period of time, and they have been able to either not pay taxes on the majority of their income, or not pay taxes on income except for what they brought into the country, which was pretty good for them, right? You can debate this one way or another. I think there is an argument you can make that, hey, listen, if they leave and they were never paying taxes anyway, then, what are we really losing, right? That's you can make that argument a little bit. But at the end of the day, a lot of people favored UK because of some of these rules, and now they're departing. However, that is not where it ends. There are two things, I think, going on in UK that you should be fairly concerned about as somebody there. So the first one is, for the longest time and up to the present, if you decided, okay, great, I'm going to build some wealth here, I'm going to get things going, and at some point in time, I will take off. I'll move to some other country, whether it's a place in the EU, or whether it's someplace in the Caribbean, or it's someplace in the Middle East, or someplace in Southeast Asia. I will go. And when I do, there's no exit tax under certain circumstances. So if you move, you can't just move out of the country, sell your assets and come back. You'll get taxed in that case. There's something called the 5-year rule. So if you move back within 5 years, you can be taxed capital gains on what you would have paid as though you're a resident of UK when you sold. So there are some restrictions on that to prevent people from doing these kind of abusive things, right? But otherwise, you can move away. And that gave like a lot of freedom to go here and there. Now, there is talks at this point in time that they're going to take that away. The statement was that, well, there was no exit tax because of the EU and freedom of movement and things like this, but they're no longer in the EU, and so now they should bring in an exit tax. And I mean, look, there's actually rational justification for why you would have an exit tax, but for you, if you're somebody who's thinking, great, I'm gonna, build up my business and get things going, then I'm gonna depart in a few years, well, you might find yourself with a huge bill. I've done some videos previously talking about exit tax. You can check them out, where I kind of go through and explain some of the problems and how that works, etc. It's not something that you really want to have to deal with, if at all possible. The second thing is there is a significant movement for wealth tax in UK. There's kind of this tax wealth, not work movement. I think the people who are behind it, some of it actually have like some good economics understanding and some terrible tax understanding. And I'll make some videos in the future talking about that. If you want to subscribe to the channel, we produce videos a few times a week, and so you can follow along, and I'll give some updates there. But it is potentially massively destructive to wealth. I have some good friends who have been investors there for quite some time. They own property, etc. And it's frankly not been that good for property in places like London over the last quite a number of years. And you might say, well, the US is maybe going down. The FTSE has done pretty well in the last little bit. Maybe now is the time to be investing in UK. I personally think that there is a fairly high risk that the wealth destruction regime in UK is far from over. That they actually would like to significantly destroy asset values. The objective is not just to tax the wealth, okay? Taxing the wealth in and of itself, okay, you get hit with a wealth tax. It's not great, right? But, you get taxed one way or another, whether they tax it via calculating it off your wealth or taxing it off your income or something like that. There are reasons why wealth tax is worse for a bunch of different structural reasons, and that's not great. But, one way or another, if you paid the taxes, okay. Now, of course, this will mean it's a much higher tax than you're paying normally. But the bigger thing by far is the destruction of the wealth, okay? You can go and listen to these people. Like, they want to take the value of your assets far lower because they want to make it so that normal people can buy those assets. And listen, that's very altruistic of them. It's very nice. I think it's a terrible way to get a broader base of people into capital ownership, okay? You want to broaden capital ownership, absolutely. You want a strong middle class, absolutely. You want affordability, absolutely. The way to do that is not to destroy wealth. That's a very bad idea. And the downstream consequences of that are really bad. So I would say now is a great time to be getting out of UK. You should probably be considering leaving UK sooner rather than later. Where do you go? There's all kinds of places. I create all sorts of videos on this channel talking about it. I live in UAE part of the year. I have lots of clients. There's like something like 1,000 millionaires a month or something is supposedly leaving, and a bunch of people coming to UK to UAE. But it doesn't have to be UAE. It could be all sorts of places across Europe. It could be places across Southeast Asia. It could be places across Latin America. It could be all kinds of places. If they're going to destroy the wealth, then frankly, most places are going to be better. So best to skirt that expedition and do it fairly quickly. Now, if you're in a situation where you can't go, and some people are, right? I mean, honestly, there's a bunch of people who would like to stay. Look, I love a bunch of things about UK. I think Edinburgh is an amazing city, remarkable, fantastic. I made some videos from there a while back. I like London. There's a great theater scene there. There's lots of cool restaurants. There's lots of things to love in many different parts of UK. And so maybe you're like, well, for various reasons, I don't want to leave, all this sort of thing. What do you need to do then? You probably want to put yourself in a position where you're somehow protecting the value of those assets. That probably means minimizing investments in UK, having investments some places that are less likely to experience that wealth destruction, which, by the way, will downstream will create some great investment opportunities, right? There will be a void and there will be investments opportunities on the back end of it, et cetera. I just personally, I'm not investing there. I don't think that time is now, okay? Next, you should probably structure it to avoid that. This typically means trust foundation structures. These are complex structures. I'm not going to kind of discuss the nuances of them here. You really have to understand how the laws work, and it affects IHT, it affects your CGT, and lots of different things. There are a gazillion ways they can be structured, but setting that up and shifting assets into those types of structures is very, very valuable. And you want to do that before the value goes up rather than after the value goes up, as much as possible. That will at least do something for you and give you some optionality. How exactly it plays into, your ability to maneuver in the future depends a little bit on what rules come into play in the future. But I think having foreign bank accounts, having foreign residencies, having foreign legal structures, having foreign assets are probably non-negotiable for people who had any sizable amount of money. So anyway, I hope that helps. If you have questions about it, please put them in the comments below. Reach out to us. As I said, you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net, or you can book a call with me. And I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.